One of the things that we've discovered statistically is that 1 out of every 3 individuals who come in to treatment have some type of family history of addiction. And it could span as far back as first generation to the current generation. There could also be, you could look at peer influences. You could take a look at a lot of, severe trauma that will cause an individual to self-medicate through their drug of choice. Um, so, it's a variety of different things. Individuals that have come from dysfunctional families, they've said to me, I vowed that I would never have the same relationship that my father and mother had. Well, it's true, they didn't, but it was a different kind of dysfunction because of what they grew up in.
Hello, welcome to Healing Millions podcast. Today, I have an honor to have amazing Dave Roberts on my show. Dave is a psychologist, university professor, and professional who has been working with addicts for more than 27 years. Today, we are going to explore what addiction is, what happens to brain when someone becomes an addict, what recovery looks like, what family and community need to know to support healing. Dave, thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's my honor and pleasure to have you here.
Nina, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Today's topic is very important because in today's world, we have more and more addicts. And when we talk about addiction, we don't only mean drug addicts, alcohol addicts, like there are other types of addiction. Can we start with that, please?
Sure. Commonly, we take a look at the substance-related addictions as the ones that are the most common addictions, such as, cocaine, alcohol, heroin, opioids. But there are also behavioral addictions, several of which coexist with substance use addiction. The biggest one is gambling addiction. When I was employed for 27 years in a New York State-run facility for individuals who had both addiction issues and mental health issues. We were mandated because of the high correlation between addiction and gambling to do gambling assessments on every client that walked in. And so that seems to be the most common. But there's other behavioral addictions, some that haven't been documented yet in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of mental illness, but things like internet addiction, shopping addiction, um, you know, uh, social media addiction. I mean, you can name any kind of behavioral addiction, and are typically others that, that are also surfacing as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that because very often we have a lot of misconceptions about addiction. And as you mentioned, gambling addiction is one of the most common addictions. I really want to define the term addiction. What does it really mean to be addicted to something?
Well, for me, it's when a use of any type of substance or engaging in any type of behavior impacts at least one or more areas of our lives. So it could impact family relationships, significant other relationships. It can result in involvement with the legal system. It can impact work, although typically what I discovered in terms of my work with many substance users is that work was the last kind of domino to fall. That was the last domino that indicated that there was a serious problem because they would do whatever they could to keep their job so that they could fund, their drug of choice. So, but it's usually just if one area of your life is impacted because of a behavior or use of a substance, then we consider that individual to have a substance use issue.
Dave, what happens to brain when person becomes an addict?
I would have first preface this by saying that I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a doctor. I can only basically tell you what I understand happens. There are neurotransmitters in our brain that are responsible for regulating mood, regulating appetite, and regulating sleep. There are also there's also dopamine. Dopamine is associated with the pleasure portion of our brain. So what tends to happen is that if an individual uses a dopamine-enhancing drug, such as alcohol, such as heroin, such as nicotine, it creates that causes this release of dopamine into our system, and it provides that kind of euphoric, pleasurable effect. So that the brain remembers, hey, when I took alcohol, I felt euphoric. My problems were eliminated. And so particularly one of the things that I used to work on with individuals was relapse triggers. So that, because anytime they could go past a place that was associated with their drug use, it could create that reinforcing feeling that they felt the first time. So we try to help them, manage that by, helping them develop sober coping skills or alternative behaviors or alternative strategies to respond to that.
Why do some people become easily addicted to something and others don't?
Boy, that is, I don't think there's one root cause, Nina. Um, One of the things that we've discovered statistically is that 1 out of every 3 individuals who come in to treatment have some type of family history of addiction, and it could span as far back as first generation to the current generation. There could also be, you could look at peer influences. You could take a look at a lot of severe trauma that will cause an individual to self-medicate through their drug of choice. Um, so, it's a variety of different things. But typically when I worked with an individual when they were first coming into treatment, I would always look for that family history. And a lot of things that tend to happen is that rules that contribute to unhealthy family dynamics, unless they're interrupted, unless they're changed through therapy or other types of intervention, those rules are going to pass down from generation to generation. So it's possible that addiction, actually active addiction, whether it's behavioral or substance use related addiction, or both, could actually skip a generation, but the rules that contributed to that dysfunctional family are still operating. So it's possible that even though it skipped a generation, those rules, as long as they're enforced, can contribute to addiction in future generations.
Thank you so much for the explanation. There's a lot of debate around whether addiction is curable or not. From scientific and psychological standpoint, what do we know now?
Well, I mean, for me, what I discovered in my work with individuals who are substance users, the first 90 days after treatment were key. We talked about something, doing 90 meetings in 90 days along with therapy. If they could stick with their aftercare plan, engage in sober behavior, the chances of them, experiencing longer term sobriety, like a year or more, was greater. What is true is that people die from addiction. There's a lot of people that don't make it. Um, but in reality, there's a lot of people that do recover from addiction. And I've got numerous letters from clients I've worked with over the years that attest to that. So it isn't all or nothing. It isn't like, well, everybody dies from addiction. That's not the case. There's a lot of individuals who actually transcend it and actually go on to do some really, really good work, service work, helping others who are dancing with addiction, whether it's behavioral or substance use addiction.
Thank you so much. So, are there methods or therapies that have shown particularly strong results in helping people heal from addiction?
One is cognitive behavioral therapy. That is an evidence-based therapy that has been shown to be very helpful to individuals who are, and very successful with individuals who are addicted, also individuals who have a history of depression. Typically, we see depression and addiction go hand in hand in many cases. Solution-focused therapy is also another one that is also very good. Any type of I think skill-based, evidence-based practice is, I think, key. Relapse prevention, strategies, I think, are really key. Um, and I think you need to build the foundation for sober behaviors, and then from there, the insight-oriented behavior comes. I don't think pure psychoanalytic approaches work very well with addiction. Going back to their childhood to figure out what triggered it may be helpful, but I think what is more helpful is the solution-focused therapies, the cognitive behavioral therapies, and the skill-based interventions that'll help individuals develop sober coping skills.
You already mentioned that the first 90 days are very important. What does the healing process usually look like for somebody recovering from addiction?
Well, I think For me, it goes into two phases. I think the first part of healing, they need to understand the impact that their behavior has had on themselves, how that's affected them spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And then the second phase, and that could come in as how their behavior impacted everybody else. But, I think the first part is one showing grace to themselves, focusing on consistency in terms of sober behavior, doing sober behaviors, doing their recovery plan, particularly as I mentioned in that first 90 days. And then from there, just developing that consistency and determining how their behavior has impacted everybody else. And there's a process, there's a 12-step process where, um, they surrender to a power greater than themselves. That could be God, that could be another type of a higher power, where they make amends to those individuals they have hurt, as long as it's not going to be hurtful to that other individual. Um, but that's also a process. One of the things I think contributes to relapse, and this is just my own opinion, is that if an individual tries to go to step 4 where they're trying to make amends too soon, or because of self-imposed pressure that they're feeling because of guilt or shame, or pressure from anybody else in their support network, they need to do that when they're ready. Because when you do a step 4, you're doing a fearless moral inventory. You're not just looking at the good things that have happened in your life. You're looking at the dark side. You're looking at the negative events. And an individual has to really be, I think, secure in themselves, have developed consistent, sober coping skills over time, and built up their self-esteem to realize that doing that fearless moral inventory is going to be more information to help them develop genuineness and also eventually service other individuals who've experienced addiction.
Thank you so much. You mentioned that there are two different phases. One, to become aware, what did they do to themselves? And the second phase is how that influenced people around them.
Mhm.
Which phase is the hardest phase?
Well, that's a good question. I think each of them have their own unique set of challenges, but I think probably the most challenging phase is when they begin to understand the impact that their behavior had on other individuals. And a lot of times what's happened, and particularly with family, there's a lot of times that they've alienated family members because of the consequences of their behavioral addiction or their substance use addiction had on the family. And typically, one of the steps we take a look at is the possibility for family therapy. And that can be more challenging because the families themselves are very guarded. They have developed behaviors to protect themselves from the addiction, maybe to live with the addiction, to do the best that they could with the addiction. So a lot of times they're going to come into treatment very guarded, not understanding, they're going to say, is this really sincere on the part of the individual, on the part of my loved one? Are they really going to embrace sobriety? How is this going to impact me? What behaviors now do we need to change as a family that have been protective for us and, that are gonna help in this new phase of our recovery. And the other thing that to understand is, though a lot of individuals want to change is a very scary thing. The behaviors that we've developed, particularly to protect ourselves against trauma, have been survival mechanisms. They've defined who we are. To relinquish that, there's a lot about the unknown that can be scary to us. And what we try to do is normalize it. Yeah, change is scary. Normalize it. Yeah, this is a new phase, but as a therapist, I'm going to be here for you every step of the way so that we can guide you through that safely and that you can express your concerns and fears about what those next steps are going to look like.
Thank you so much. So, do I hear this correctly? The hardest thing is to repair the broken relationships with families because they've been hurt and they don't trust the individual. What do families often misunderstand about addiction?
Um, I think a lot what they misunderstand, I think a lot of times is they may blame themselves unnecessarily. Now, certainly there were behaviors that you could say enabled the addiction, and a lot of times they'll feel really guilty about that. But what we try to tell individuals, look, you did the best that you could under the circumstances that were given. This was survival. You did what you did out of love. You didn't do what you did out of nothing other than love because you thought what you were doing was the right thing to do in those circumstances. It turned out that it wasn't. but it wasn't because you did that intentionally. You just didn't know any better. And one of, I think, the biggest keys to working with families is education, or working with individuals who are addicted is education, educating them on what their disease and the consequences. If they have a mental health diagnosis, what that means, how that coexists with addiction, how addiction influences mental health and vice versa. And the same with families. They need to be educated and realize that, hey, could I have done things differently? Yeah, but I did the best that I could given what I knew.
That's a very important message for everybody who's listening. And, we always do the best what we can in the circumstances that we are and with the knowledge and experience we have.
Here's another thing with families and individuals who are you working with addiction. Even the most resistive client, the most resistive family, they're going to give you a door that they're going to say, I'm going to open this door up a little bit. This is the door I want you to go through. That's the door you go through. Because if you want to build a long-term relationship with a family or with an individual who's addicted and their family, they're driving the bus. It's always client-directed. It's self-directed. Their free will is going to drive what what treatment strategy or what treatment door you go through. Go through the door they open, because once you go through that and you establish trust and rapport with both the individual and or their family, then they're going to be open to other doors that you want to open. But you can't break down the defenses. You can't bust down the doors of a family's defense mechanisms or a client's defense mechanisms, because you'll lose them. Will not engage with you. So
Thank you so much. I think that's very, very important that you said, what you said. When they give you the opportunities, you need to take the opportunity and follow the rules they set. I really want to dig deeper into this relationship with the family, because a lot of families want to help, but don't know how to help. And in that biggest desire to help somebody, they do some things that are not always the best one. What can family do to support somebody recovering from addiction? And what is the best way to do that?
Well, I think first, I'm going to kind of backtrack just a little bit. First is for family members to get some support for themselves, to learn how to cope with the individual's addiction and the aftermath of recovery. So there are Al-Anon meetings for family members and Nar-Anon meetings for individuals who are drug addicted, for family members to go and it's based on the 12-step philosophy, for them to learn how to not only manage and cope with an individual who's a loved one who's addicted, but also to learn how to take care of themselves. And I think, the second thing I think for families is to first of all, with any type of family therapy, one of the things that we try to do is to have an individual, to share their concerns or what they need from their family during recovery and what the family needs from them. So creating that kind of communication. What I'd like to see is for the individual who is truly taking action to be sober, to stay sober, to say to their family, when you see me slipping, I want you to tell me. And I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to scream. Make me aware. So it's creating the channels of open communication where people are listened to, where they're heard, and where they feel that they're part of the process. It's about creating where we can teach families how to support their loved one and for their loved one how to support their family.
What do you wish society understood about people who struggle with addiction? Because very often society judges them.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
Well, first of all, there is a stigma regarding addiction that the person is simply defined only by their addiction. Their addiction is their behavior. It does not dictate who the person is. I have worked, Nina, with individuals who are intelligent, which is another myth, is that individuals who are addicted are not that bright, which is farthest from the truth. These are extremely intelligent, creative, really, really warm, genuine individuals when they're not using. And the other thing is that it isn't just the person is addicted and stays addicted until the time that they die or they become cognitively compromised. There are a lot of individuals that have had periods of sobriety, 3, 4, 5 years. I had one person who came into treatment who relapsed after 20 years. And these are individuals that did some very, very good service work during that time. And a lot of times we take a look at, it's either like an end game. It's either all or nothing. But we have to take a look at the totality of that individual's life. These individuals, for the most part, these are good people that are struggling with a behavioral addiction or dancing with a behavioral addiction or a substance use addiction. And always it's treating the behavior and not at the expense of the self-esteem of the individual. So what I want your audience to understand is that it's the behavior that drives their choices. But it's not who they are. You remove the addiction. These are some really, really good, warm, very impactful individuals who've done some great work service in the world.
Thank you so much for the explanation. I truly believe nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be addict. This is
No,
something that develops over time unintentionally. What is your experience with that?
it's very true. I mean, and the other thing is that for individuals that have come from dysfunctional families, they've said to me, I vowed that I would never have the same relationship that my father and mother had. Well, what tends to happen is it tends to be a different type of dysfunction because of the rules that they grew up with. So let's say if the father was abusive and the mother was a victim, those roles could reverse. That person who came from an addicted family could find somebody um, who was abusive to them and who was or vice versa, or where they became the abuser. It's kind of like, that cycle can tend to perpetrate. But I've heard that happen. I've heard that many, many times. I vowed I would never have the same relationship as my parents did. Well, it's true, they didn't, but it was a different kind of dysfunction because of what they grew up in.
Thank you, Dave. Dave, you already touched a little bit about addiction, how it influences other people around you. But I want to go even one step deeper and understand what consequence that has on the children of addicts.
Well, certainly one of the things we know about children is that parental attachment, particularly early on, is so key. So obviously, if you have a parent who is addicted and you have the other parent who is trying to manage that person's addiction, you're talking about very ambivalent attachment with children, that children will experience. I mean, the bond is not as that strong. So if that has not changed going on, they may experience anxiety in their own relationships, inability to trust, insecurity, or they may connect with individuals in relationships who are very familiar with the same rules because that's all they knew. Um, with kids also deal with magical thinking. They think it's if they were a better child, their loved one wouldn't drink, their mother wouldn't be yelling at them, um, and it's like that with death. A lot of times, if a child yells at a dog, let's say for example, and the dog gets out of the yard and gets hit by a car, the child thinks because I yelled at the dog died. So, and the children will place a lot of weight on themselves, so they'll do a lot of magical thinking and blame themselves for things that were certainly out of their control. But the biggest thing is attachment is so key early on, Nina, in our attachment with our caregivers. The strength of that is determined early on. And if addiction definitely gets in the way of that.
Thank you so much. I think that's very, very important. The message that you said, attachment to kids, is very important. And I just want to go one step further and ask a question. Can children break the cycle of addiction?
Yes. Um, there are there have been support groups I know for children of alcoholics, adult children of alcoholics, and yes, they can break the cycle. Um, there's no doubt in my mind. Families can break the cycle. This isn't just an all or nothing piece. I mean, where there are success stories, and I think a competent therapist, competent support group, and also the family and the individual needs to understand that they need to change and they have to be motivated to change. Those are the two factors that I think contribute to recovery. Um, we talk about kind of like individuals with addiction, particularly substance use addiction, having a spiritual awakening where they experience a series of crises over a very short period of time that tell them that I can't do this anymore. I need to take steps to do something with my life. I need to change the behavior. And again, just because they want to change doesn't mean change is going to be easy. It doesn't mean that they know how to change. We have to normalize that change is difficult, and we also have to provide them with the skills that they feel they need to navigate sobriety. So, but yeah, I tend to be an optimist anyway, Nina, but in my experience as 27 years as an addictions professional, I've seen a lot of success stories. I also have seen other individuals that haven't made it, but I've seen a lot of success stories.
That gives us hope that recovery is possible and healing is possible and breaking the cycle is possible. Dave, if you could speak to someone right now who is struggling with addiction or love someone who is addict, what would you say to them?
I would say for somebody who's struggling with addiction, I would always roll out the red carpet that, I'm here whenever you need to talk, and for me to support you through that. And I would say the same thing with families as well too. I'm here. And also I would tell both the family and the addict to be gentle with themselves. Um, that look for times where you were successful in sobriety, where as a family you were successful in having open communications, because even if it's a day, even if it's 2 days, even if it's a week, there's always that period of success that we can go back on and learn from. So it's give yourself grace, know that the door is always open when you're ready, and that your addiction and your family struggle with your loved one's addiction does not define who you are as a family or does not define who you are as a person. And together, if we can get through this if you'll allow me to be a part of that.
Thank you, Dave. That's a beautiful message. And very last question, how can people stay in touch with you and how they can connect with you to work with you?
They can connect with me via email. It's bootsyandangel@gmail.com. On social media, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, so they can connect with me there. My website is davidrobertsmsw.com if they want to, find out more about my background or connect with me that way, because, in case they, for some reason, have lost my email address or whatever, my contact information is there. So, yeah, there's a variety of ways to get in touch with me, and I'm always thankful to talk with anybody who is struggling and going through challenge.
Thank you, Dave, so much for being on my podcast today. We'll put your links in the description below so people can find and connect with you. Thank you so much once again for being here. And everybody who is listening or watching this interview, if this interview inspired you, moved you, touched you, please share it with your friends and family members, because we heal together. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, be brave, shine your light, because the world needs that love and light inside of you more than ever. I'm sending you lots of love and big hug. Bye for now.